A woman stands in front of a mirror. She isn't checking her hair. She isn't adjusting a collar or smoothing a sleeve. She's asking it something quietly, the way you'd ask a question you already dread the answer to. Who is the fairest of them all? For years, the mirror has told her what she needed to hear. Today, it doesn't. It says her daughter's name instead. And something in her face changes, not anger, not yet. Something closer to the moment. A person realizes the ground has already shifted beneath them, and there's no getting back to where they were standing a second ago. You know this story, or you think you do. A girl, an apple, 7 little men in a cottage, a prince, a kiss, an ending stitched up tight and happy. That's not what this is. Not in 1812. Not in the version the brothers Grimm actually sat and wrote down, word for word, from the women who told it to them. In that version, the woman standing at the mirror isn't a stepmother. She's the mother, the one who carried her, the one who was supposed to be the safest person in the world for that little girl to be near. This isn't a story about magic. It's about what a mother does when her daughter's beauty stops being something to be proud of and starts being something to survive. Here's something almost no one thinks about when they hear this story. Who actually told it first? Not the Grimm brothers. They didn't invent a word of it. They collected stories that had already been circulating across German-speaking communities for generations, recording versions they heard from a range of storytellers, many of them women, mothers, grandmothers, midwives, and yes, educated women from comfortable households too, passing along what they'd heard from someone before them. Women who often had less real voice than their circumstances suggested. Not in court, not in church, not always even at their own table, but women who had seen things, one way or another. Because in that world, a young girl wasn't quite treated as a full person yet. She could be married off at 12 to a man 3 times her age, if the arrangement suited someone with more say than her. Punished for disobedience. Punished, just as easily, for being beautiful, because beauty drew the wrong kind of attention in a house with no real protection to offer. There was no shelter to run to if things went wrong at home. No one whose job it was to believe her. So the women did the only thing available to them. They hid the truth inside a story simple enough to tell out loud, in front of anyone, disguised as something for children, because that was the only shape the truth was allowed to take and still survive. Snow White was never just a fantasy. It reads almost like testimony, a warning, passed hand to hand, voice to voice, in the only form that wouldn't get you punished for saying it. Go back further. Before the mirror ever spoke her name, a queen sits by a window in the dead of winter, sewing to pass the time. Her needle slips the way it always does in these old stories, because nothing in them happens by accident, and 3 drops of blood fall from her finger onto the fresh snow gathered on the sill. White snow, red blood, black wood of the window frame. She looks at it a moment too long, and something forms in her, uninvited, a daughter. Skin like that snow, lips like that blood, hair like that frame. She gets exactly what she asked for. But wishes, in stories like this, are never simply gifts. They're contracts, and contracts always come due, usually at the worst possible time, to the person who thought they'd already paid in full. Snow White grows. And somewhere, in the growing, quietly, without either of them quite naming it, she starts to outgrow her mother, not in years, but in the one currency that mattered most in that world: beauty. The only kind of power a woman was reliably allowed to hold. And any currency that starts flowing towards someone else is a currency you are by definition losing. The queen doesn't stop loving her daughter all at once. It's slower than that. A glance held 1 second too long. A silence where warmth used to sit automatically. Because more and more, when she looks at the girl she raised, she isn't seeing her child. She's seeing what's coming for her. Snow White couldn't have told you what changed. Children rarely can. She only knows the room feels different than it used to, that the mother who once reached for her without thinking has started watching her instead, the way you watch something you're trying to measure. No one has sat her down and told her she's become the problem, so she does the only thing available to her, which is keep trying to be the same daughter she was yesterday and wonder, quietly, why that isn't enough anymore. The mirror in this story was never magic. It was authority, given a frame and hung on a wall. In the world this comes from, a mirror that large, that clear, was rare, expensive, a thing only the powerful owned, and it didn't flatter. It recorded precisely whether or not you wanted that day's version of the truth, which is the part most retellings miss. The mirror was never predicting beauty. It was confirming rank. In that court, beauty wasn't decoration. It was infrastructure. It decided who got listened to, who stayed safe, who kept a seat at the table when the decisions were being made. Lose it, and you often lost the seat along with it. So every morning, the same question, and every morning, for years, the same comforting answer, until the morning it isn't. Snow White is the fairest now. One sentence, and everything the queen has spent years quietly dreading stops being a feeling and becomes a fact spoken by the single voice in the castle that isn't allowed to lie to her. She hasn't been challenged. She's been replaced. In a world built to make room for exactly one woman's worth at a time, there's no version of sharing that throne. There's only handing it over, or refusing to. She refuses. And the decision that follows doesn't come from cruelty so much as from a very specific, cornered kind of terror. The terror of a woman who was taught her whole life that her value came with an expiration date, watching that date arrive early, wearing her own child's face. She sends for a huntsman, someone loyal, someone used to doing quiet, unpleasant things among the trees without asking why, and gives him an instruction that most versions of this story have spent 2 centuries quietly cutting. Take her into the forest, kill her, bring me back her lungs and her liver. She isn't asking for proof of death. She's asking to eat her. In the world this story comes from, people genuinely believed the organs held something of the person still inside them. Their youth, their vitality, whatever made them alive in the way that actually mattered. To eat them was to take that thing for yourself. The queen doesn't only want her daughter gone. She wants what her daughter has. The huntsman leads the girl into the trees, and somewhere among them, something in him refuses to finish it. He lets her run and kills a wild boar in her place, bringing its organs home instead. The queen, believing completely that she is eating her own child, has them boiled in salt, sits alone, eats. This was never written for shock. It's grief, turned inside out and aimed at the wrong target, a woman trying to hold on to time by consuming the very thing that was taking it from her. Somewhere in the trees, meanwhile, a girl who has just learned her mother wanted her dead is walking deeper into a forest that doesn't care whether she lives either. We don't often stop to sit with what that's actually like, to find out, all at once, that the one person whose entire job was to keep you safe was the one who arranged your death. There's no clean word for that kind of alone. And maybe the harder part is that some small piece of her is still waiting for the story to correct itself, for footsteps behind her, for someone calling her name, for her mother to have already changed her mind by the time she dares to look back over her shoulder. Nobody comes, so she keeps walking, further into a forest that was never going to answer her either way. She walks until the forest stops feeling dangerous and starts feeling simply endless, and eventually finds a small cottage tucked so deep among the trees it barely looks discovered. 7 small beds, 7 small plates, 7 small chairs. She's starving the kind of hunger that erases judgment entirely. So she eats a little from each plate, drinks a little from each cup, and gives in to sleep in whichever bed will hold her. When the 7 men who live there come home from the mines and find her, something happens that no soft version of this story ever quite shows you. They don't rescue her. They negotiate. If you cook, if you clean, if you sew and wash and keep the house, you can stay. And what is she supposed to say to that? No. Behind her is a house she can never go back to. In front of her is a forest with nothing in it for a child on her own. There's no third door waiting somewhere out of frame. So she says yes. Not because any of it feels like home, because for the first time since the huntsman lowered his knife, someone has finally told her exactly what's required of her to be allowed to keep living. Say it plainly, and it changes shape immediately. She has just traded one household for another, out of a home where she was hunted, and into one where she is, at best, useful. This isn't metaphor stretched to fit. In the world this story comes from, young people worked early, and girls were often expected to take on domestic labor long before adulthood. Survival simply looked like work, with very little space between childhood and responsibility. And the men she's living among are minors in the older folklore. Figures who spent their lives underground, backs bent early, lungs damaged by the work. Mining communities often depended on whoever could physically do the job, including younger workers and smaller-bodied laborers who could move through narrow spaces. She hasn't escaped anything. She's moved from one form of control into another. A mother who wanted her dead, replaced by a household that will keep her alive for exactly as long as she's useful to it. That was never a rescue. It's survival, dressed in rescue's clothes, so it would be easier to swallow. The queen learns her daughter is still breathing. What follows isn't rage. It's method 3 visits, each one colder and more deliberate than the last. Not a woman lashing out once, but a woman escalating, the way people do when the first attempt to erase someone hasn't worked, and the second one hasn't either. The first is a lace. She arrives, disguised as a peddler, harmless, warm, carrying a beautiful bodice lace, and offers, gently, to lace the girl up properly. You'll look so lovely. Snow White, who has no reason yet to distrust a stranger's kindness, lets her. The queen pulls the lace tight, then tighter, past comfort, past warning, until there's no air left to draw in, and the girl collapses to the floor. The dwarfs return in time, cut the lace. She breathes again. Control, offered as care. Restriction, tightened by someone smiling the entire time. The second is a comb carved, polished, the kind of object that says, I only want you to look the way you deserve to look. Let me fix your hair, sweet girl. She lets her again. Of course she does. It's a comb. The moment it touches her scalp, she's on the floor a second time. The dwarfs come home again, pull it free. She wakes again. Beauty, turned into an entry point, the very thing meant to make her more herself, used instead to make her disappear. The third is different, because by now, the queen has learned something too, and so, in her own way, has Snow White. The apple is prepared with real care. One half a deep, perfect crimson, the other pale white. Red and white again, the same two colors from a wish made at a window, in the snow, a lifetime ago. Only the red half is poisoned. The queen arrives at the cottage, and this time, the door stays shut. Snow White has learned not to open it. So the queen smiles through the window, instead, patient, utterly convincing. I understand. You don't trust me. So watch, I'll eat this half, and you eat the other. She bites the white side, chews, swallows, smiles. And on the other side of that glass, a girl watches her own mother eat from the very same apple, and come to no harm, watches the proof happen right in front of her, and does the only thing anyone does when the evidence is that immediate. She believes her. She opens the door, takes the red half, bites down. It lodges in her throat, and this time, there's no breath left to interrupt. The dwarfs come home to find her gone. They shake her, search her clothes for pins, for poison, for anything reversible. They weep over her. She doesn't wake. Line up those 3 attempts and look at the shape of it. Physical restriction first, then manipulation dressed as care. And finally, the one that actually works, trust, built patiently enough to be turned into the weapon itself. She was never naive. She didn't fall for temptation. She was convinced, deliberately, by someone who knew exactly how to be believed by her. Her body doesn't decay. Skin still pale, lips still red. She looks, everyone keeps saying, like she's only sleeping. The dwarfs can't bring themselves to put her in the ground, so instead they build her a coffin out of glass. Not wood, not stone, something you're meant to see straight through. They carry it up onto the mountainside, somewhere they can watch over her, and there she stays for years, visible the entire time. Sit with that for a moment. She's dead. And still, she isn't hidden. She's preserved, displayed, kept beautiful, kept lookable, as though her worth was never really tied to being alive in the first place, only to being seen. Even gone, she remains something to look at. For the first time in this entire story, nobody is asking anything of her. She isn't cooking, she isn't proving she's worth the shelter she's been given. She isn't reading a stranger's smile for the danger hiding underneath it. She is simply still entirely, completely still, for once. And somehow, even now, that doesn't stop anyone from deciding what should happen to her body next. A prince passes by one day and sees her through the glass. And here's the part every gentler version of this story has quietly cut. He doesn't fall for her spirit, her kindness, anything she's ever said or done. He's never once heard her voice. He wants her exactly as she is. A body behind glass, and nothing more required of her than that. "Let me take her," he asks the dwarfs. They refuse. He begs. Offers gold. Won't leave. Eventually, worn down by a grief that was never his to grieve, they hand her over. As his men carry the coffin down the mountainside, one of them stumbles on a root. The coffin jolts hard enough to shake the piece of apple loose from her throat. She coughs, her eyes open. There's no kiss here, no spell undone by love, true or otherwise. Just a stumble on a rock and a body that happened to still have breath left in it. She doesn't wake because someone loved her enough to reach her. She wakes because, for once, gravity was on her side instead of against it. At her wedding, an uninvited guest arrives, a woman who doesn't yet know whose wedding this is, until she sees the bride, standing at the front of the hall, alive, and understands everything in the same instant. The color leaves her face immediately. She's recognized on sight. And in the version written down in 1812, the one No Children's Edition has kept since the punishment that follows is described without flinching, in full. A pair of iron shoes goes into the fire until they glow. She's made to put them on, then she's made to dance. She dances while her feet blister, while the skin gives way, while the sound she's making stops resembling anything like a scream and becomes something else entirely. She dances until she can't. And then, somehow, she keeps dancing anyway. She dances until it kills her. Later editions remove this scene outright, too visceral, too raw, sitting too uncomfortably next to a story meant to end a child's bedtime. But the people this was first told to wanted exactly this. They needed justice they could feel in their own body, not simply hear about secondhand. The old logic was blunt. The punishment should match the crime. A woman who spent her life valuing performance and appearance above everything else is undone, in the end, by being forced to perform until there's nothing left of her to perform with. But that isn't the version most of us inherited. Over the next 2 centuries, this story was softened. Not all at once, piece by piece, edition by edition, until it was gentle enough to read at bedtime. The mother became a stepmother because audiences could accept cruelty from a woman who married in, but not from the one who gave birth to her. The lungs and the liver quietly disappeared, replaced with something vaguer, something easier to look away from. 3 attempts folded down into 1, sometimes 2, because watching someone escalate deliberately, again and again, felt too close to something real. A child's labor was renamed a rescue because it was gentler to believe she'd been saved than to admit she'd been put to work. A stumble became a kiss because true love felt like a better ending than an accident. And the shoes, the fire, the dance, the dying simply vanished from the page, as if they had never been written at all. The story didn't disappear, it just became easier to tell. And that raises the only question that actually matters here. If this was truly only ever meant for children, why did it need so much rewriting? Strip away everything decorative, and this was never just a fairy tale. It plays almost like a document testimony, carried forward by women who had no other place to put it, no other way of being believed. It's about what happens when being seen becomes dangerous, when a daughter's beauty starts to look, to the person who raised her, less like a legacy and more like a countdown. When the house you grew up in turns out to be the most dangerous place you'll ever live. When staying alive means earning it, every day, with no illusions left about what safety actually costs. When trust real, patiently earned trust becomes the sharpest thing anyone ever uses against you. It was about mothers who came to see their daughters as rivals, about beauty treated as currency, about homes that became dangerous, about trust turned into the sharpest weapon in the house. This was never a story about innocence. It's a story about what happens once innocence becomes a target. Think back to the girl at the very beginning of this sitting beside her mother at a window, still young enough to believe home and safety were simply the same word. By the end, she knows better than that. She knows a beautiful object can still hurt you, that a kind voice can lie convincingly, that a closed door can be the difference between living and not, and that sometimes the very person who first taught you what trust felt like is the same person who teaches you, later, never to hand it over freely again. This story has survived more than 200 years, not because it entertained anyone, because it was true. So the next time someone calls Snow White just a story for children, you'll know better than that. It never was. It was a warning, whispered by women who had no other voice left to use. And now, you've heard it. But the truth doesn't disappear. It only waits to be told again.